By the time the canyon fire reached the school road, every fast horse in Silver Pine had already turned back. 12 children and one injured ranch hand were trapped above a wall of flame with less than an hour of daylight. Then 36-year-old Eliza Hart brought forward the gray mule everyone in town called a coward. Amos had one torn ear, a cloudy left eye, and a habit of refusing any trail that smelled wrong. The men laughed until the mule walked straight toward an abandoned mine opening hidden behind the schoolhouse. Before the night ended, Silver Pine would learn that Amos had never been afraid of danger. He had simply spent years noticing which danger a human being could survive. Eliza knew that difference because people had been mistaking her caution for weakness almost as long as they had misjudged the mule. 3 months earlier, she had arrived in Silver Pine with 2 trunks, a black coat, and a wedding ring she still wore. Her husband, Daniel Hart, had died in a mine collapse near Leadville the previous winter. Eliza had been left with a small pension, unpaid medical bills, and no desire to return east to relatives who pitied her. Silver Pine needed a schoolteacher, and Eliza needed work that did not require anyone to pretend she was cheerful. The town sat where a dry creek met a narrow Colorado canyon beneath hills covered with pine and scrub oak. In spring, the creek carried snowmelt. By August, its stones were hot enough to burn bare skin. That year, rain stopped in June and did not return. Grass turned yellow along the ranch fences, wells dropped by inches, and every afternoon smelled faintly of dust. The schoolhouse stood a mile outside town because the original settlement had once been farther up the canyon. It was a square building of rough pine with a stone chimney, 12 desks, and a porch that leaned toward the road. Behind it rose a slope cut by old prospecting trenches and one black opening covered with fallen brush. The children called that opening the Dead Mine. Most adults called it nothing at all. On Eliza's first morning, rancher Owen Pike delivered a load of split pine and told her the school mule came with it. Amos stepped from behind the wagon as though he had been assembled from spare pieces of 3 older animals. His gray coat was rough, his right hind leg carried an old white scar, and his left ear ended in a ragged point. Owen said Amos could pull a light cart if the road stayed flat and nothing unexpected happened. Eliza asked what happened when something unexpected did. Owen smiled and answered, "Usually Amos stops." The mule had refused bridges, narrow cuts, smoke, loose rock, and 2 different men who tried to beat sense into him. Owen said no ranch needed an animal that considered every job before doing it. Eliza looked at the rope scars behind Amos's jaw and asked whether thinking had ever actually injured anyone. Owen told her she would change her mind the first time the mule embarrassed her in front of the town. That afternoon, Eliza harnessed Amos to the school cart and drove toward the public well for water. He moved slowly but evenly until they reached a plank bridge over the dry creek. Amos stopped so abruptly that the water barrels knocked against each other behind him. Eliza clicked her tongue once and waited. The mule lowered his head, sniffed the bridge, and shifted his weight away from the right side. 2 boys watching from the creek bank began laughing. One shouted that the coward had found another monster made of wood. Eliza climbed down instead of striking him. She pressed her boot against the right plank and heard a dry crack. A second push sent the board breaking through to the stones below. The boys stopped laughing. Amos crossed after Eliza moved the cart to the stronger left side. At the well, one of the boys asked how the mule knew. Eliza answered that she did not know yet, which was different from saying he did not. During the next week, Amos stopped 3 more times. He refused a patch of loose shale where a wagon wheel later slid sideways. He backed from a shed where a lantern had leaked coal oil onto the floor. He planted his feet before a cottonwood limb broke in a gust and fell across the road. None of those moments made him popular. They only made people say the old mule was lucky. Eliza had learned that luck was the word people used when observation belonged to someone they did not respect. She began watching Amos as carefully as he watched the world. He did not raise his head when church bells rang or children shouted behind him. He reacted to wind, footing, sharp smells, and changes in the way the ground carried vibration. When he hesitated, his good eye moved first. When he was truly frightened, both hind legs trembled. The difference became useful. One Saturday, Eliza drove him behind the schoolhouse to clear brush from the slope. Amos stopped 20 feet from the old mine opening and refused another step. Eliza expected fear. Instead, the mule stretched his neck forward and breathed deeply through his nostrils. A thin ribbon of cold air moved out of the darkness and lifted a strand of hair beside Eliza's cheek. She held a strip of cloth near the opening and watched it pull inward, then outward, with changing gusts. The mine was not sealed as the town believed. Somewhere inside, the old workings still connected to open air. Eliza mentioned the draft at the general store that evening. 3 miners told her abandoned tunnels were good places to lose a teacher. Owen Pike advised her to leave old holes and old mules equally alone. Only Samuel Beck, a retired mine carpenter with a missing thumb, asked which opening she meant. When Eliza described the slope, Samuel's expression changed. He said the Black Alder prospect had been cut 15 years earlier and abandoned after producing more water than silver. The main adit ran into the hill, but a ventilation drift had once opened on the north side of the ridge. Eliza asked whether the drift still existed. Samuel said half the mine had probably fallen in by now. He also said Amos had once worked there. The mule had hauled ore for the final owner of Black Alder before Owen bought him at an auction. Eliza looked toward the hitching rail, where Amos stood with his torn ear turned toward the street. Samuel remembered that miners disliked him even then. Amos stopped before bad timber, refused heavy smoke from blasting, and would not enter headings where air had gone still. The men called him stubborn, because stubborn was cheaper than repairing a dangerous tunnel. Eliza asked how Amos got the scar on his hind leg. Samuel said a roof fall had trapped 3 animals and 2 miners during the mine's final winter. Amos was the only mule that backed away before the timbers came down. A handler forced him forward again. The falling rock cut his leg and killed the mule beside him. Eliza understood why a rope scar might outlast the rope. The next morning, she took Amos to the mine without a cart. She stopped well outside the opening and let him choose whether to approach. Amos stood for several minutes, breathing the cold draft. Then he walked to the entrance on his own. Eliza tied him to a pine where he could see daylight and entered only far enough to inspect the first timbers. The tunnel floor was damp beneath a crust of dust. White mineral stains marked the lower wall. A rusted ore rail disappeared into darkness under fallen boards. She found a shallow channel that still carried a thread of clear water toward the entrance. That trickle interested her more than the silver ever had. By mid-August, the school cistern needed refilling every other day. Eliza began collecting the mine seepage in a covered barrel for washing slates and wetting cleaning rags. Parents complained that she was teaching children beside a dangerous hole. Eliza answered that the children were never allowed inside. She also cleared dry brush 30 feet around the entrance. Owen asked whether she expected the mountain to catch fire. Eliza pointed toward the brown hills and said she expected dry grass to behave like dry grass. He laughed, but he sent 2 ranch hands to widen the fire break around the schoolhouse. The children helped move pine needles away from the porch. Eliza turned the work into a lesson about wind, fuel, and why small preparations mattered before anyone smelled smoke. Amos watched from the shade and stole a carrot from 9-year-old May Collins. May became his loudest defender. She insisted a mule that could steal without being noticed could not possibly be stupid. Her older brother Ben said thieves were not automatically intelligent. Amos took Ben's hat while he was saying it. Even Eliza laughed. The sound surprised her enough that she stopped for a moment. She had not laughed since Daniel's funeral. That evening, she folded his black wool scarf and put it back into the trunk instead of wearing it against the mountain chill. Grief had not become smaller. It had simply made room for one ordinary good day. 2 days later, Amos stopped beside the mine again and would not return to the school road. Eliza checked his harness, hooves, and leg. Nothing was wrong. Then she noticed his good ear angled uphill. A warm wind moved across the schoolyard from the south. At the mine entrance, the same wind came out cold against her face. The changing air made Amos restless. Samuel Beck came the following Sunday with an old survey notebook wrapped in oilcloth. He had found it beneath tools from his mining years. One page showed the Black Alder adit and a narrow ventilation drift reaching toward North Ravine. The drawing was incomplete, but the distances matched the ridge. Samuel warned that a map from 15 years earlier was not a promise of an open tunnel. Eliza agreed. A map was only a question with measurements. She asked him to inspect the first 100 feet with her. Samuel said he was too old to crawl under dead timber for curiosity. Eliza asked whether he was too old to crawl under it for 12 children. He looked toward the dry hills for a long time. The next morning, Samuel arrived with a lantern, rope, hammer, and new timber wedges. Owen saw them and demanded to know why the schoolteacher was reopening a mine. Eliza said she was not reopening anything. She was checking whether the old drift could serve as an emergency shelter from a grass fire. Owen said the road to town was safer than any tunnel. Samuel asked what happened if the road itself burned. Owen answered that people had used that road for 20 years. Eliza said fire did not care how long a road had been popular. They entered only as far as solid timber allowed. Amos remained at the entrance with May holding his lead rope. Inside, Eliza found cool air, damp stone, and several places where the roof needed bracing. At 80 feet, a fall of loose rock blocked the old oar rail. Samuel believed the ventilation drift continued beyond it. He also believed clearing the fall would take days. Eliza had school 5 mornings a week and no money for hired miners. She began working 1 hour before sunrise. Samuel joined her twice, then every morning. They removed small rock by hand and replaced 2 cracked posts with pine cut from Owen's ranch. Owen complained about losing good timber to a hole that had never paid anyone. Eliza offered to pay him from her winter coal money. He told her to keep the money and stop making generosity difficult. That was the closest Owen came to admitting he had changed his mind. The children were never allowed past the entrance. They carried cleared stones to the edge of the firebreak and stacked them around the water barrel. Amos hauled the heaviest loads in a small sled. He would enter the first 20 feet, then stop where the tunnel narrowed. Eliza never forced him beyond that point. Instead, she watched where his nose turned. He always faced the side where the air moved strongest. Samuel noticed it too. He said miners once carried candles to judge air, but a mule had the advantage of breathing all day. By the end of the week, they reached the rockfall. Cold air came through gaps large enough to move dust. That meant open space survived on the other side. Eliza decided they would clear only enough for a person to crawl through. Samuel disagreed. If the tunnel ever became necessary, frightened children would need room to walk, not crawl. They spent 3 more mornings widening the passage. On the 4th, a flat stone shifted above Samuel's shoulder. Amos brayed outside and pulled hard against his rope. Eliza dragged Samuel backward just before the stone dropped where he had been kneeling. Samuel sat in the dust and stared toward the distant square of daylight. He said he was beginning to dislike the word coincidence. Beyond the fall, the tunnel split. The main heading sloped downward into standing water. The ventilation drift climbed left beneath newer timber. Eliza held the old notebook beside the junction. The left passage matched Samuel's faded line toward North Ravine. They followed it another 60 feet before a collapsed support ended the inspection. This fall was larger and packed with clay. Samuel said clearing it safely would require proper shoring. Eliza marked the place with white chalk and turned back. She had learned enough to know the tunnel might help. She had not learned enough to trust it with children. That distinction mattered to her. The next day, smoke appeared as a thin gray line beyond the southern mesas. A lightning storm had crossed the high country during the night without giving Silverpine a drop of rain. By noon, a rider brought word of a grass fire 12 miles south. The wind was pushing it east away from town. Most people relaxed. Eliza did not. Wind had already changed twice that week. She moved the school water barrels onto the shaded north side of the building. She packed blankets, bread, a first aid box, and lanterns into the handcart. She showed every child where to meet if smoke ever covered the road. Owen found her practicing the line and said she was frightening them. May answered before Eliza could. The girl said knowing what to do was less frightening than guessing. Owen looked at Eliza and told her the child was becoming troublesome. Eliza said that was education. By evening, the southern smoke had flattened into a dark band. The fire still remained miles away. Samuel wanted to return to the collapsed drift at dawn. Eliza agreed, but only if they brought Owen and 2 ranch hands for proper shoring. Owen protested until Samuel reminded him that his youngest son sat in the second row of Eliza's classroom. At sunrise, 4 adults entered the tunnel with tools. Amos carried short timbers to the narrow section and stopped exactly where the bad air began. The lantern flames beyond him leaned toward the left drift. Eliza felt a stronger draft than before. Somewhere beyond the clay fall, the north opening still breathed. They set 2 new posts and began removing packed debris from below. After 3 hours, a hole opened near the ceiling. Cold air rushed through hard enough to extinguish Samuel's lantern. Owen laughed for the first time underground. He said the widow had found her useless tunnel. Eliza answered that they had found moving air, not safety. The difference silenced him. Samuel crawled through the opening with a rope around his waist. He returned covered in clay and smiling. The passage beyond climbed another 100 yards and ended behind a screen of roots. They had reached the north side of the ridge. No one had seen the old ventilation exit because scrub oak had grown across it. By afternoon, they opened a gap large enough for a child and cleared brush from the ravine outside. The route from Schoolhouse to North Ravine was nearly 400 yards underground. It was cramped, wet, and unpleasant. It was also a second way out. Owen wanted to tell the whole town immediately. Eliza asked him to wait until they had marked every weak timber. She did not want curiosity sending children into the mine. They spent 2 more days hanging white cloth strips along the safe drift. At each junction, Eliza painted a simple arrow on stone with lime. They stored 2 lanterns and a coil of rope in a dry niche. Samuel placed a covered crock of matches beside them. Eliza left the mine believing preparation had finally caught up with fear. That night, the wind shifted north. At 3 in the morning, bells began ringing in Silver Pine. The southern fire had crossed a dry gulch and doubled in size. A wall of sparks was moving toward Pike's lower range. Owen rode out before dawn with every ranch hand he could gather. Eliza opened school because children were safer together than scattered across distant homesteads. Parents arriving from the south left sons and daughters with her while they moved livestock. By 9 o'clock, 17 children filled the 12-desk room. The youngest was 6. The oldest was 14. Smoke turned the morning light yellow. Eliza kept the windows closed on the south side and wet cloths from the mine barrel. Samuel arrived coughing and said the main town road remained open. He also said fire had reached the ridge below Pike's hayfield. Owen had men plowing a dirt break along the road. Eliza sent Ben outside to bring Amos from the shade. The mule came willingly until smoke thickened near the south fence. Then he stopped. His good eye widened, and the muscles above his scar began trembling. This time Eliza knew the difference. Amos was afraid. She led him behind the schoolhouse where the stone slope blocked some smoke. He calmed beside the mine entrance. Samuel noticed and said the old mule had chosen his shelter. Eliza answered that people might need to choose it soon. At 10:30, a wagon arrived with an injured ranch hand named Cole Mercer. A horse had fallen during the firebreak work and broken Cole's ankle. The men who delivered him had to return immediately. Eliza splinted his leg with 2 rulers and a piece of window brace. Cole said the road was still passable if they left now. 17 children could not fit in the one wagon. The school cart held 6 safely, and Amos could not pull it fast through heavy smoke. Samuel proposed sending the oldest children on foot with wet cloths. Eliza refused to divide the group while the wind kept changing. She sent Ben up the school bell pole instead. From the roofline, he could see the road curving toward town. Ben climbed down pale. Fire had crossed behind the lower bend. The road was no longer a road. It was a strip of smoke between burning grass. Samuel said they still had the north mine drift. Cole stared at him as though fever had taken his hearing. He knew Black Alder by reputation. His father had once called it a coffin with rails. Eliza said coffins did not usually have fresh air moving through them. A gust struck the schoolhouse and drove sparks across the roof. The children heard the first dry hiss against the shingles. Eliza made her decision. Everyone would enter the mine before flames reached the yard. They carried water, blankets, bread, lanterns, and the first aid box. Cole could not walk, so Samuel and Ben tied 2 chairbacks into a crude litter. Amos would drag the litter on the ore sled through the wider first section. At the narrow passage, people would carry Cole. Eliza assigned each older child 1 younger partner. May took 6-year-old Lucy by the hand without being asked. No one cried until a window cracked from the heat outside. Then 3 children began at once. Eliza told them fear was allowed to come with them. It was simply not allowed to choose the direction. Samuel opened the mine gate. Cool air touched their faces. Amos entered first with Cole's sled behind him. For 20 feet, the mule moved steadily. At the old narrow point, he stopped. Owen had once called that stop useless. Eliza now treated it as information. She raised her lantern and saw smoke curling along the tunnel ceiling ahead. Samuel cursed softly. The south wind was forcing smoke through an unseen crack in the main heading. The marked safe drift still pulled clean air from the left. Eliza moved everyone low and turned them toward the cloth markers. Amos hesitated, because the ceiling dropped above his ears. Eliza removed the wooden pack frame from his back. Without the frame, he fit. Cole gripped the sled and told her to leave him if the mule could not manage. Eliza told him injured men did not get promoted to decision-maker. Amos stepped forward. Behind them, the mine entrance flashed orange. The schoolyard had caught fire. The children could no longer turn back even if panic changed their minds. At the first junction, smoke thickened in the downward heading. Amos pulled left before Eliza touched his lead. He remembered. That realization steadied her more than any prayer she had managed that morning. They reached the former rockfall in darkness broken by 2 lanterns. The new timbers groaned as heat outside changed the air pressure. Samuel inspected the posts and waved them through one pair at a time. Cole's litter caught between 2 rocks. Ben tried to yank it free. Eliza stopped him and shifted the injured leg before moving the sled sideways. The delay cost less than another broken bone. A deep rumble came from the main heading behind them. Dust rolled through the passage. Somewhere in the abandoned mine, old rock had fallen. The youngest children began calling for their mothers. May started counting cloth markers out loud. Other children joined her. 1 marker, then 2, then 3. The counting gave fear a smaller job. At marker 7, Amos stopped again. No broken timber stood ahead. No smoke crossed the lantern light. Eliza almost urged him forward. Then she remembered the bridge. She knelt and placed her hand on the floor. A faint vibration trembled through the stone. Samuel felt it too. The fire above the ridge was dropping burning trees onto loose ground. They waited. Seconds later, dirt spilled from a ceiling crack 10 feet ahead. A section of old support collapsed across the drift. If they had continued, the front children would have been beneath it. Cole whispered that the mule had done it again. Eliza said Amos had done nothing magical. He had noticed the warning before they did. The collapse blocked half the passage. A child could crawl over it. Cole could not. Samuel wanted to leave the sled and carry him across shoulders. The low roof made that impossible. Eliza studied the fallen boards and remembered the oar rail still buried beneath the dirt. She used Samuel's hammer to uncover 1 iron length. They laid the litter across it like a narrow bridge. Ben and Samuel lifted from opposite sides while Eliza protected Cole's splinted ankle. One by one, they moved him over the fall. Amos waited without pulling. When Cole reached the far side, the children passed the water and lanterns. Then Eliza led Amos over loose stone 1 careful hoof at a time. His scarred hind legs slipped once. May pressed both hands over her mouth. Amos recovered and stood still until the rubble stopped moving. They continued. At marker 10, the drift began climbing toward North Ravine. Fresh air strengthened. So did the sound of fire. Samuel realized flames had reached the ridge above them. The north exit might already be surrounded. Eliza refused to guess. She sent no one ahead alone. At the final bend, Amos braced all 4 feet and would not approach the exit. The children stared at Eliza. This was the kind of moment when everyone wanted the animal's refusal to mean one clear thing. It did not. Eliza smelled smoke, but also wet earth. She moved beside the mule and felt air against her cheek. The draft still came inward from outside. That meant the exit itself was not burning yet. Amos's nose pointed downward. Eliza lifted the lantern. A rattlesnake lay coiled between warm rocks near the opening, driven from brush by the fire. Samuel killed it with the flat side of a shovel before anyone stepped closer. Amos walked forward immediately. The North Ravine appeared through roots and gray light. For one breath, everyone believed they were safe. Then Ben saw fire moving along the opposite slope. The ravine was not burning yet, but sparks were falling into dry brush around them. They had escaped the schoolhouse only to enter another path the fire could close. Eliza counted 17 children, Samuel, Cole, and Amos. No one was missing. She looked north toward a line of bare granite above the ravine. Beyond that rock lay an irrigation ditch feeding Pike's upper meadow. If they reached the ditch, they would have water and little fuel around them. The shortest route climbed steep ground no wagon could use. Amos could manage it if Cole was not on the sled. Samuel said they could carry Cole between 2 adults. Eliza looked at the older boys. They were exhausted but still standing. Cole told her his ankle mattered less than the children. Eliza said she was tired of people offering pieces of themselves because planning felt slower. She shortened the mule's drag line and lashed the litter between two long pine poles. Amos would pull from the front, while Samuel and Ben kept the rear from sliding. The children formed pairs again. They wet blankets in the mine seat barrel they had rolled to the north exit 2 days earlier. That forgotten chore now gave every child a damp cloth against smoke. The group started uphill. Amos moved slowly because steep, loose ground punished speed. Eliza stayed at his head and let him pick each step. Behind them, brush near the mine exit caught fire. Flames erased the opening within minutes. The second route was gone. There would be no retreat. Halfway to the granite, Lucy stumbled and refused to stand. May knelt beside her and said Amos was still walking, so they could too. Lucy asked whether the mule was brave. May answered that he was probably scared of everything important. Eliza heard it and almost smiled. Courage sounded different when a 9-year-old explained it. A burning pine branch rolled down the slope behind them. Ben shouted. Samuel pulled 2 children aside as the branch crossed their path in sparks. Amos lunged forward and nearly dragged Cole's litter over a rock. Eliza caught the lead rope and steadied him. For the first time, the mule tried to run. She stepped in front of his good eye and waited until he recognized her. Then she laid one hand against his nose. His breathing slowed. They moved again. The granite strip began 50 yards above them. Smoke turned the sun red. At the final rise, Samuel's bad knee gave way. He dropped beside the litter. Ben could not control the rear pole alone. Cole tried to roll off and crawl. Eliza refused. She tied the rear poles together with the rope coil and looped them around a stout scrub oak stump. The stump became a brake. Amos pulled while Eliza advanced the rope from one anchor to the next. It took 5 times longer than walking. It also kept Cole from sliding downhill. The children reached granite first and turned to watch. No one cheered. They were too tired. When Amos stepped onto bare rock, his front knees buckled. Eliza released the harness before he could fall against the litter. He stood trembling with foam on his chest. She gave him water from her own canteen, cap by cap. Cole protested. Eliza said the mule had carried more weight than any person there. They followed the granite north until they heard running water. Pike's irrigation ditch cut across the ridge like a narrow silver line. The children dropped beside it. Samuel soaked blankets and laid them over low brush to widen a safe patch. Eliza filled every container they had. Wind drove the fire toward the ravine they had just left. For 20 minutes, sparks crossed the granite. Some landed in blankets and died. Others spun away toward the ditch. The group stayed low with wet cloths over their faces. Amos stood in the ditch until water covered his hooves. Then the wind changed again. This time it pushed the main flame east. The ridge did not become quiet. It simply stopped becoming worse. Near sunset, riders appeared beyond the upper meadow. Owen Pike led them. He had spent 2 hours searching the town road and believed the school group was dead. Then he saw 17 children sitting beside his irrigation ditch. He dismounted before his horse fully stopped. His youngest son ran into him hard enough to knock off his hat. Owen held the boy without speaking. When he finally looked at Eliza, his face was streaked with ash. He asked how she got them through the ridge. May answered, "The cowards showed us." Owen looked at Amos standing knee-deep in water. The old mule lowered his head and drank. No one laughed. The riders carried the youngest children back after dark. Cole was taken to the doctor's office, where his ankle was reset properly. Samuel rode behind Owen and complained the entire way about being called elderly. Eliza walked beside Amos because she did not ask him to carry another ounce. From the ridge, she could see the schoolhouse roof burning below. The building collapsed before midnight. Her 2 trunks, Daniel's scarf, and nearly every book she owned burned with it. The wedding ring remained on her hand. For a moment, that small fact hurt more than the lost school. She had spent months protecting objects because they were the last witnesses to a life that ended. Now smoke had taken most of them without asking permission. Amos touched her shoulder with his torn ear. Eliza rested her forehead against his face and let herself cry where no child needed reassurance. Silver Pine lost 3 barns, part of Pike's hayfield, and the old schoolhouse. No child died. No ranch hand died. The fire burned itself thin against grazed land east of town 2 days later. When people returned to the school site, only the chimney and stone foundation remained. The mine entrance behind it had blackened but not collapsed. The north exit was scorched around the roots. Owen wanted to close both openings immediately. Eliza agreed to close the dangerous headings. She did not agree to erase the safe drift. Samuel proposed rebuilding the supports and placing locked gates at both ends. The town council approved the work without argument. 3 weeks later, classes resumed in the church hall. A new schoolhouse was planned closer to town with a stone roofline and cleared ground around it. Eliza insisted it include 2 exits. No councilman laughed. Owen brought her a new desk made from pine cut before the fire. He also brought papers transferring Amos to her ownership for $1. Eliza asked why $1. Owen said a gift might offend a woman who liked making generosity difficult. She paid him with the coin. Amos spent autumn hauling light loads and refusing bad ideas. People began stopping when he stopped. That change amused Samuel more than anything. He said Silverpine had finally trained itself to listen to a mule. May painted a small gray mule on the new school sign. Ben complained the ears were too large. Amos stole his hat again before the argument ended. Cole Mercer healed slowly and walked with a cane through winter. He returned to thank Eliza for refusing to leave him in the tunnel. She told him survival was not a favor he owed anyone for. He said that sounded like something Daniel might have agreed with. Eliza had never told him Daniel's name. Cole explained that he had worked 1 season in Leadville and remembered a miner who kept reporting rotten supports others ignored. Daniel Hart had been that man. Eliza felt the room narrow around the words. Cole said Daniel died after entering the collapsed heading to pull another worker out. The company later described the accident as unavoidable. Cole had believed that story until the Silver Pine fire. Now he understood how often avoidable danger was renamed after someone refused to prepare for it. Eliza did not need Daniel turned into a legend. She only needed the truth to sound like the man she remembered. That night, she removed her wedding ring for the first time. She placed it on a cord inside her dress instead of hiding it in a drawer. Remembering him no longer had to mean standing still. Winter snow covered the burned slope and filled the old school foundation. Amos grew a thicker gray coat and complained loudly whenever ice formed in his water bucket. Eliza kept teaching. Samuel became the unofficial inspector of every stovepipe, roof brace, and stubborn hinge in the new school. Owen funded the second exit without mentioning whose idea it had been. The children practiced fire drills twice before spring. They treated them seriously because they knew preparation was not the same thing as fear. By the next August, green grass had returned to parts of the canyon. Black trunks still stood where the fire had crossed hardest. The mine drift remained gated, braced, and marked as an emergency passage. No one called it useless. No one called Amos a coward either. The name had become embarrassing to the people who once used it. Eliza never corrected them when they called him brave. She simply knew bravery was not what made him valuable. Amos was valuable because he noticed the bridge board before it broke. He noticed oil before a lantern found it. He noticed bad air, unstable ground, and the tremble that came before falling dirt. He had been punished for hesitation by people who preferred obedience to information. Eliza had been dismissed for caution by people who preferred confidence to preparation. The fire did not make either of them wise. It only made everyone else finally see the wisdom that had already been there. On the frontier, strength was useful, speed was useful, and courage could keep a person moving. But survival often belonged to the one who noticed what stronger people rushed past. A warning is not weakness merely because it slows you down. Preparation is not fear merely because it happens before anyone else is worried. And an animal, a child, or an overlooked person can recognize a danger that experience has taught others to ignore. The lesson is not to trust every hesitation without question. The lesson is to ask what that hesitation might be telling you before you punish it. Eliza saved 17 children because she checked a draft, studied an old map, cleared brush, stored water, and repaired a tunnel before she needed it. Amos helped save them because she allowed his caution to become information instead of forcing it into silence. Their greatest advantage was not luck. It was the habit of paying attention before the emergency made attention expensive. Years later, people in Silver Pine still argued about whether Eliza or Amos had truly led the children through Black Alder. Eliza always gave the same answer. She said the mule found the warnings, Samuel found the old knowledge, and the children found the courage to keep walking. Her job was only to listen soon enough to put those things together. That answer was less dramatic than the legend. It was also more useful. Would you have trusted a mule that everyone else called cowardly, or would you have forced him forward with the stronger animals? Share your answer in the comments, and if this story stayed with you, like the video and subscribe for more stories from the American frontier.